Oh. My first what?
Your name.
Oh, I forgot. My name is Natalie. I'm B.
I'm Tristan. I'm
Lumpy.
E.
Gonna be over here.
I'm Lauren. I'm D. D, that's our number. D.
Letter.
Letter. I'm letter
I'm
D.
Kellen. I'm C.
Christy,
If you want to make
A.
it a number.
Hey.
If you want to get a number, what?
I was
Okay.
going to say 3.
So the
Wow.
first
Okay.
2 were the videos, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So talked about why acquisition is important.
If he had said comprehensible input one more time in the video, I might have cried. He said
I know.
comprehensible input so
Except for
many times.
he said it so many times that I was like, what does that even mean? And
I know.
I know, but I
I had
was
to
like,
write
those
it
real
down
words,
to be like, oh, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I just toned it out whenever he would say comprehensible input, just like every 3 words. I was like, nope, heard it already.
I ended up just like, never mind.
Oh my gosh. So I just
Good
quoted
catch.
when I just basically wrote down it gives us fluency and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, I'm opening my discussion.
I think the one thing that I mainly got was that he's like, I thought that it would be like acquisition equals fluency and learning is, or acquisition is fluency and learning is accuracy. He's like, but I was wrong because really it's like acquisition is fluency and accuracy.
It's just like the application of what you've learned,
Yeah.
but like the ability to apply what you've learned.
Right.
But that's just what he believes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because at first I was
You can believe
confused.
whatever you want.
Well, I was
You are your own
confused because,
person.
like, when I first watched the video, he was like making like super like direct statements of like this is what it is. But then when I read in the book, it was like, oh, well, these people like think this. And,
I think the biggest difference is that language acquisition is unconscious and language learning is conscious.
Yeah.
And he said that like 3 times, I think. But
yeah.
We learned that in class too.
But then you can't just go straight into language acquisition without learning some language theory because that doesn't work. Which
Yeah.
is exactly what we talked about before about not throwing children into English-only classrooms. When they don't speak any English, they have to have some English rules, but then they do need the acquisition. They need to be like submitted in the, or like put in the culture.
I still think like going to a culture is a good way to learn a language.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you should know some theory before, or a little bit before.
Oh, you're going again?
Yeah, but this time I'm gonna go and actually learn the language because summer was a struggle.
Are you going with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do we do 1 and 2?
No.
2. No, 2. He basically just talked about the same thing over
Yeah.
and over about like low
Comprehension.
anxiety, motivate, or if you have anxiety, if you have lower anxiety and you're motivated and you have self-esteem, then you're gonna acquire language.
Only if you're being given comprehensible input, though.
Yeah.
Incomprehensible input does you no good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
He
incomprehensible.
definitely said that those variables aren't the only thing you have to think about, which is why I was like, more things.
Yeah.
But he just kept
More
saying
things.
low anxiety and high self-esteem.
Uh-huh. And motivation to learn.
And,
Which
like,
makes sense because if you don't want to learn a language, why would you?
And like the child's comfortableness in the class, like is
Which
the
is
class
like their self-esteem.
or like their low stress level and stuff. Like, is it a safe space? Is it a place where you can make mistakes?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to have your that's later on. I'll get to that later. Say.
Yeah.
I was
I know.
gonna tie in another reading to it.
I keep wanting to like say stuff for like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, turn right to it.
Guys, we're putting the readings together, and I read this throughout the middle of the night last night. Literally
Throughout
from like
the
2 to 5 a.m. That's when I did this.
There
2
you
to
go.
5
That's
a.m.
what we do it. 2 to 5
You
a.m.
wanna do
Just
set
so you
2?
know.
Yes.
You see
Okay.
what time I posted 4:54?
Set 1.
So, set 1, but I'm A, and mine was talking about like developmental psychology and how it's like related. And I was just saying like, because I was basically quoting the article a little, or the reading, because it says since researchers cannot ask babies to reflect on their learning, so how are you doing, baby? He's like, oh yeah, well. So, and they can't directly observe their brains. They have to observe their linguistic output and then follow their transition through the stages of language development. And that's a lot of how developmental psychology is involved.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
Thanks for the story,
It
Christy.
was really short. I read the whole thing. I was like,
I didn't do set 1 because it said we didn't have to write it down.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I don't know what I wrote.
It's so we don't have to write it
Because
down.
I didn't write
Oh,
about
it just says read this part to better understand.
Oh,
Oh.
that's what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like,
So
oh my
I
gosh, I didn't write.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I was thinking that.
So it's not
That's how
part
much
of
I
the
wrote
post?
too.
Dang it, I looked
Well,
over the sheet then.
mine was just about.
Well, you're still supposed to read it and like know about it, but
Yeah.
you didn't have to write about it in your post.
You don't have to write about, but wouldn't we still technically discuss it because?
Yeah, we can discuss it.
Oh, okay.
I did A.
Who's B?
MB.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Bruce, do you want to
It's
know?
okay.
C was.
Well, I'm seeing I didn't. I mean, I
think
read
OMG.
it, but I didn't
Do you know?
write it
Do you
down.
remember anything about linguistics?
Well, I did everything in half an hour ago. Well, linguistics.
I can talk about how Vygotsky's theories help us understand the first language acquisition process.
Go on.
Yeah,
I
that's
wrote a
mine
paragraph
too.
about it, yeah. And
Yeah.
Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, and how it's incredibly helpful in helping us understand the first language acquisition process, because children can only understand what they can, like, what they're ready to understand, so it's a whole comprehensible input thing. If you just start talking to a child that doesn't speak any Mandarin in Mandarin and you just start telling them all this random things, they're not going to get anything because it's way out of their zone of proximal development. You're just saying
Spewing.
random sounds to them. But if they have had some background in learning the Mandarin language, I don't know how I'm talking about the Mandarin language right now, but that's the language came to mind. But if you have, like, if the child knows some Mandarin language and you, like, speak in a slow, okay, I'm terrible at slow speaking, but if you speak in, like, a slow, simplistic form, like, level of Mandarin, then the child will learn a lot.
Why do they call Mandarin oranges Mandarin?
That's a good
Does
question.
it have
Can that be a
anything to
money
do?
question?
No.
I
Alright.
had the Vygotsky part too, though, and I was just like, I didn't write much, but I didn't like do much of it. But I was just thinking about how, like, isn't it Vygotsky who believes that, like, adults have an important part in children's cognitive development?
Yeah.
So I was like thinking about that and how, like, the input that people are getting from language, it's like it's going to be adults that speak the language accurately, that they're getting the
Or more
acquisition
capable
from.
peers.
Yeah, or more capable peers that they're getting the acquisition from, which is the development of their language. So that kind of tied in.
Dope.
Are B and C ready now, either one of you?
I
we
can
can
just
just-
tell like the key points.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, I'm just gonna read what I have.
Okay.
Language always occurs in a social context, and it depends on the meaning depends on the context. So, like for example, they say like "excuse me" could mean two different things. Like you could be saying like "excuse me, I need to talk to you," or "excuse me, move." And then it talks about how like adults like adjust their language to talk with like young children. So like you'd never walk up to an adult and say like, say bye-bye. Say that to a child. Or like, do you know how to count to 3? Or something, anyway.
I talked to adults.
Tristan, that might be a problem.
It also talks about how communicative competence is the ability to use language appropriate to particular social context.
Yours explained what communicative competence is. I couldn't figure out what it was.
That one is communicate.
Oh my god.
She just know.
So basically,
What you just said.
it's just the ability to use language in appropriate ways in particular like context. So like if you were talking to like your professor, you would speak differently.
Yeah,
than
than if you
your
spoke
roommate
to
turn on your
or something
monitor.
like that.
I'll explain what that is later. No, I'm telling you out of theory.
I'm sorry. All right.
Okay, and then another thing, it talked about how different like social groups are like taught to speak in different ways than other social groups, and that's just depending on like a lot of different things, like SES.
Oh, it's like the
Like-
video we watched in 432 yesterday when it compared Trump and Sanders.
Bernie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and how
Oh,
they talk.
They're from the
They're both
same.
from New York.
Yeah, but from different times. Well,
Or
different
different
areas.
neighborhoods.
Classes.
So
Different classes,
interesting.
yeah.
I want to watch
So
that.
Bernie has more of the accent, the New Yorker accent, because he grew up in a lower income area
Oh, okay.
and more of the working class, whereas Trump grew up in higher class, so he has more of the standard English.
That's so interesting. Okay.
That was a funny video too.
Did you just say cray?
I didn't even like notice his like accent,
Bernie?
honestly.
Really?
I watched
really?
so many of the debates, and I didn't even notice until they showed the video, and I was like, he does say it like that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
I just love the part where I was like, you call him Bernie Sanders, but he calls himself Bernie Sanders.
Sanders. Yes.
Sanders.
Alright.
That's
so-
D. No, I already did D. C. C
Okay.
is the letter we're going to.
Mine was on linguistics, and it basically talked about how children have an already acquired sense of language, and so our job is to just help them with how the new language functions. So being able to draw upon their own native language helps a lot. And it talked about Chomsky, and it really just quoted him a bunch of times. And then
It's gone off a couple times.
I'm just making sure it's not like an emergency. We don't need to leave.
I mean, we're not too far off the ground.
Totally jump out the window.
No, I'm not
No,
jumping
I
out the
could
window.
not jump out
Lauren
the
can stay
window.
here in the
Okay,
emergency.
we climb
I
out.
died
Wow,
in
thank you.
fire.
Bella's gonna stay with me. We'll stop, dropping, and roll through the building.
I mean, I'll definitely break my knee because it's already injured, but I could skate out.
I mean, yes, we could, but
I would.
Wait, see.
sorry.
I'm good.
You're
That's
done.
what mine was
Okay.
on.
Cool.
Okay, set 2.
Alright, so I was A. And mine said, how does Krashen understand, that's how we say it, right?
Yeah.
I understand the relationship between research theory and practice. I think B, you had the same thing, right? So I was reading over yours too, and I was like, we have the same thing. The research and practice can only come from theory. Without theory, there's understanding of what needs to be researched, and from the research comes the practice.
Yeah, they're all like intertwined.
You
That would
chose
make
the
sense.
same one.
We had the same one.
Okay. You did.
So see.
Okay.
We killed it.
I had psycholinguistic, and it really just talked about psycholinguists and how they examine the language the student is developing. So, like the learner's inner language, or the version of English the language learner is learning. There's a lot of learning in that. So the research questions might inform our work as a teacher of English because they could provide me with insight into a learner's second language system, and what the best methods might be to teach the student.
Okay, so I learned about sociolinguistics, and sociolinguists talk a lot or think a lot about the influences of social and cultural factors on language development. And they also think a lot about interlanguage variation and whether or not there's any systematicness to it or any like patterns in it, and also whether or not like a learner's interlanguage changes over time. And then they also study the cause of variation in interlanguage. And I don't exactly remember what interlanguage is, but I'm pretty sure it's like the relationship between a learner's first language and their second language. It's like the relationship between the two, which would make sense that sociolinguists would consider that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it was.
How do you have a relationship between
Languages?
Yeah.
Well, because like you have some like knowledge of how grammar works in your first language that you can transfer over to your second language. It's just not.
It might not be exact.
Yeah.
And
You have like some idea,
But it still could be
like subjects, verbs,
analytical or the other one.
Yeah.
Two different forms of
D. There we go.
Something tells me we're all really, really, really exhausted.
Oh, D just went.
Yeah, I just wanted
I
to.
mean E.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
I meant you, but I
I
So-
meant mother.
So basically, neurologists care about how, or neurolinguists care about how language is represented in the brain. And because we have a lot like higher technology now, they can research this a lot better than they could before. And the main questions that they look at are interesting. I don't really understand how it would affect. The first two, I don't understand how they would affect a teacher. So, where in the brain are first and second language located, and what are the ways that language with different characteristics are represented in the brain? And it was talking about like, oh, how as a teacher can you use these things? That's what mine was asking, to inform your work as a teacher of English. And I don't know what would do that. Like, oh, this is where language is located in your brain.
That helps me
Yeah.
in this field.
So-
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good muddy question. Ooh. Time?
1438.
1438.
We're like,
You should make a song about it.
14.
Hey, 14 is the number of cupcakes on the tray in the math problem I made children solve this morning.
What's the question?
What a nerd.
How does knowing where language is located in the brain and how characteristics are represented in the brain help a teacher of English?
Beautiful handwriting.
Actually, yeah. How does that help?
I don't know.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, it's nice that we know, but like, what does that mean? Oh,
Like,
this
oh,
part of
right
language is located
here.
Mine
here.
looks like I
Make
changed
sure you
my
use this
handwriting
part of your
now.
brain today. Awesome.
Focus in. Focus in.
The kids know what's brain.
What's brain mean?
I feel like I
Well,
may
if you
have
look
an
in this
answer.
part of your brain, you'll find out.
Oh, wait, what's this?
So I think that it's because, like, based on where, like, knowledge of languages are in the brain, you could, like, pull off of other things. Like, that's not the only thing that part of the brain does. So you can help them with, like, other subject areas that would strengthen that part of the brain. That's my guess.
Still, I
But
think
I'm
though
not
that
sure.
like even
That
knowing
makes
that, you
sense.
just want to focus on the
Yes,
subject
very
areas. Like you
influence.
wouldn't necessarily need to know where in the brain it was. You just want to know like what it's related to.
But if you knew
Right,
where
but
in
if
the
you
brain
knew-
it was, then yeah, you could relate it back to other topics that they're learning
I still
to
think
make
it's a money question.
connections.
No,
But
yeah,
still-
for sure it's a nutty question.
For
I was
sure.
just saying that might
Yeah.
be.
The rest of my section, there was one more question that says, "Is there a critical period for second language acquisition?" And I thought this was important as teaching English because, you know, there's gonna be if there is a period that is better for
Actually,
second.
there's not.
Yeah, he doesn't. He thinks that you can. Well, he says that you can learn it no matter when, but that
yeah,
doesn't
he
mean
thinks
it's
there's
gonna
not
be.
a critical
No,
period.
but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be more difficult or easier to acquire at certain ages.
True.
And so if there is that critical period, it's probably, as a teacher, the best time if you can teach them within that critical period of time.
Why are you laughing?
because of her sentence structure.
Haters gonna hate. Are we on sub
Have you
3?
heard me try to talk today so far? Like we're okay.
Are we on sub 3? Question mark?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in. And mine was pretty much talking about, do I have to say it every time? How does he distinguish between acquisition and learning?
Wow.
Which is like everything. And I was like, all right, well, the acquired system, or acquisition, requires meaningful interaction and real-world conversations. We've literally talked about this already. And then the learn system, or learning, is formal instruction and results in conscious knowledge about the language, like the rules of grammar, and he thinks that it's less important than acquisition. And yeah.
He didn't really think that was important all that much.
Yeah, he was like, it's like there, but it's secondary, like, to everything.
To
And he-
life.
Well,
And
he
he-
said that for like children acquiring learning a language, he was like, it's 100% acquisition, no
Mhm.
learning involved.
Well, like babies, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then when you get to be like our age, then
That's
it makes sense to learn
98%
about it.
acquisition.
I think he said 90.
Yeah, he's a 90.
Oh, he
yeah,
did?
90 for adults.
Oh, I heard 98, so I was like, okay.
Wow, whole new percentage. So glad we take all these grammar classes in school.
My turn?
Yeah.
Okay, so for B, I was asked what is Krashen, or sorry, put that in there. What is Krashen's natural order hypothesis, and what did Krashen learn when he attempted to apply this practice? So the natural order hypothesis basically says that no matter what language you're learning, you learn the grammar rules in the exact same order.
Interesting.
And so when you put this to practice, it happens. So.
He was proved
Wait.
correct.
So he did like a research.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
so
and then he was right.
he
He
went.
made a hypothesis and it was proven correct.
I think. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, so Chinese and Spanish-speaking students learning English, and they both acquired the language of English in the same order.
Oh,
That-
so it's not like
is it
whatever
because
language
they're
you're
taught?
acquiring, it's like whatever language you speak before, and if you're all learning the same language, you'll learn the grammar in the same order for that language.
Whatever language you're learning, you'll learn it in the same order.
Is that for everyone? Like, who's to say there's not going to be some kid that does it differently?
And like, what if a child is learning, what if two different children are learning Chinese and then another child is learning Spanish? Will they learn the same grammar for those languages in the same order?
In the same order. Every language you'll learn in the same order.
Is this like one of those things where Chomsky says that there's a...
And then someone else
Yeah.
later in life finds that he's entirely wrong.
I don't think so. It seemed really accurate. The only thing that's different is that, so it says all students will acquire language in a natural order, same order every time. However, the rate that you learn that will differ. That's why some students.
How do they all do that in the same order though? Like what if they're
So
taught
they
totally
learn
different
like
things?
capitalization and punctuation and
Well, it
Is
says
it more like
you-
sentence structure?
No, you learn like it's more like, you know how like you learn about like morphemes and then phonemes and then like it gets bigger and bigger. That's how you learn.
But what
the
if you get
language.
taught it a different way?
yeah.
Yeah, like there's no.
But this is acquiring, not
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
That's just what
I
he
think
said.
I think we can get a muddy question.
I think
of
we're
this.
doing
If you're taught it differently, then I bet you'll learn it.
Yeah,
Sorry, Natalie, we're not.
But
asking
you don't know.
We're asking
not
the book
asking you
through you.
Okay, but also this. What
Sorry,
she,
I can't wait to see the video. You're gonna be like,
okay, but what she was.
Tristan's
But
all over.
listen. But the book's saying that they like will acquire grammar the same way, not that they'll learn grammar the same way. So if they're taught it, then they're gonna learn it the way they're taught. But if they're just acquiring,
Like you
strictly
pick up.
acquiring, you're gonna pick it up
That's
in the
saying
same
that
order.
babies that are raised in a Chinese-speaking place and babies that are raised in a Spanish-speaking place are going to learn their language in the exact same
I think
grammatical
it
Yeah,
order.
was. I thought it was per individual. Like if you learned it a certain way.
What?
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 It's not a muddy question if we answer it.
What if we just don't know what we're asking anymore, though?
I know, I feel like we don't. I'm confused about what's going on now.
Natalie is being
My
attacked
question
over
was like, okay,
Is it the same
my
as
personal
Chinese?
question was, I think we have two questions, but I'm going to say one of them. I think that one question is probably, is what they're talking about just if you learn it in a school that teaches you that language in a certain way, or is it, if you're being taught a different way, does it change? Like if I were to teach a student a language in an entirely different order than you're supposed to learn it, like they say you are, will they learn it that way, or will they just not learn anything until
Oh,
they
it
go
just
back to
says
that?
back to the
It
beginning.
just says acquire the language in the same order. So not like
So this is
learning
like-
in a classroom, it's just like acquiring the
So
language.
if they just got thrown into somewhere, like a Spanish speaker and a Chinese speaker got thrown into America and were expected to acquire the knowledge of the language, they would learn the grammar in the same way.
If they had, like, you know how Crashin was saying, you have to have a little
Yeah, yeah.
bit of
Yeah.
learning, and then you're thrown in, and
Maybe
you'll
like the
acquire
Euro
it in the
classes.
same order.
Okay, so I have a question that could be a muddy
Morphemes,
question that's like an actual question-ish thing. What if you had like two babies and they're both being raised in different language-speaking things in countries, and the two languages have entirely different grammatical structures and like entirely different things? Are they still gonna learn the same? Are they still gonna learn the thing in the same order?
If a language has a word and a sentence structure,
No,
Yeah.
Can
the
our
words
muddy
with
question
words
maybe
and
be
structure.
why?
Yeah.
I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because I think the fact that he just states it doesn't help me at all in understanding like what's going
Good
on.
job with the muddy question.
Yeah,
coming up with
why?
the answer for that.
Yeah.
No, that was so helpful.
Okay. Also, time check is 12:30ish.
Okay,
Oh, wait,
I
we
actually
almost
have to
done.
leave in like 30 minutes then.
Yeah, I have someone that's literally meeting in this room in 30 minutes. So
Perfect.
okay, well our next thing is together. Are we good with what we just
Yeah, we're
discussed? Okay.
Sorry,
I
I'm
was like,
interrupting Emily.
We're
What?
just, are we
So
good?
sorry
Just
we're
not
interrupting.
going. Okay. So we were together
I'm really excited about this
for
one.
set 3. So do you want me?
You
Well,
can go first.
okay.
The monitor
well-
hypothesis.
Oh, I was just gonna list. Oh yeah, it just asked about the monitor hypothesis. For some reason on here, I listed all of the hypotheses.
Oh no.
But that's okay. So I talked about the monitor hypotheses, and it was basically like. Do you want to explain it? I have a good example from my childhood, but I can't really
Okay,
explain it very
okay.
well.
Monitor hypothesis is like, it states that like learned language and grammar rules that you like are taught in language classes, like the grammatical rules that you learn in like a language class. Okay, I said that 3 times. Sorry. Are like act as like a monitor or like an editor system in your brain. So when you're like trying to speak your second language, you have to like the acquisition is what affects the phonology and the syntax and the vocabulary and like what you're actually gonna say. Like you can't say anything with just rules. You have to have some sort of acquisition of it and like knowledge of like how the language works, which is like innate and unconscious almost, again with the language acquisition thing. But like the monitor is like all of the rules and things you've learned. So like if you're talking to an adult or a person or an important person, then you're going to turn on your monitor and edit things and make sure that everything you say is super grammatical and like prescriptively perfect and like the rules match. But if you're talking to a child, or if you're just trying to get your ideas across, or if you're focused on meaning instead of like grammatical correctness, then you're just going to say things without turning on your monitor. So you'll turn off the rules,
Like right now.
and you'll just like me right now, yes, my grandma's too. And you're just like saying whatever comes to your mind without thinking about whether or not it sounds perfect. And there's a lot about how children really, or people that are learning a language, really struggle to focus on meaning and accuracy at the same time. And so the monitor should be used very minimally in like casual conversation, but like more when it's in like formal conversation, obviously, but only if you're more focused on accuracy than meaning, if that makes any sense.
And they were talking about how if you're a teacher, like having the monitor like on constantly, like a lot of teachers of other languages do. Like I don't know, people have taken another language, but when I took Japanese, like it was all like accuracy all the time.
Yeah.
And that made me really stressed out, and I actually didn't learn the language very well.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I can still
So
say
you
like
said
where's
teachers
the
should?
bathroom, but
So teachers should or should not?
they shouldn't
should not,
focus on it
yeah.
that much.
Their monitor should be turned off all the time except for when they're like editing papers or like grading a test or something.
Yeah, and if you're teaching a new language, like if you should focus on either communication, like that they're just getting their words across, or idea, or you should be like, okay, this is the time when we're sitting down and we're just focusing on this, because it's hard for them to think. It's hard for people who are learning languages to put them together right away.
So that only if you have English language learners in your class, though? Like if you don't have any English language learners, are you expecting
No,
to
it's
have
been the
a
same
monitor?
then for like
Yeah.
anything.
What was really helpful when I took ASL in high school was like, because we would have days where we wouldn't speak at all, and so we would like enter the classroom and I would get really nervous, like, am I saying this the right way or whatever. But what was really helpful was that my teacher would say it back to me correctly, and so then I would like, she wouldn't correct me by any means, but she'd be like, do you mean like da 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 da? And so then I'd be like, oh, okay, and then I would learn that way.
Yeah, that's a nice
instead.
way to like correct somebody
Yeah.
too, rather than making it really pressurized and like, wow, you totally did that wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another big thing that they talked about is like when you're like teaching academic content, that it's more about making sure the child understands, or the student understands like what they're learning and like the content, than whether or not they can say it correctly, because like really who cares, as long as they understand what they're actually learning. So
Right. It's kind of like when you teach writing to little kids and you're like, just get your thoughts down on the paper.
you're like, just
don't
write 2
focus
sentences
on
and fix the spelling later.
Yeah. Or else they get stuck on that one word and they're like,
I don't know how to say
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
3 hours later.
Yeah.
You can go.
what's the example?
No, yeah, you have an example from the
The
chapter.
Japanese thing was my example.
Oh, okay.
I said it.
Okay. So Krashen's input hypothesis is that people acquire language one way. So that's either through oral and written messages, but that they understand. So that's comprehensible input. And he says that comprehensible input is the source of all acquired language, and it's the teacher's job to find ways to make academic content comprehensible.
So wait, only oral and written?
So oral and written messages that they understand is the only way they acquire language.
So what about the ASL articles? That's not oral or written.
Maybe that's under oral. I don't know.
Maybe
I think that's the point. Maybe that was the point of having the article
Yeah,
is sign language.
because
Plus,
we
what about languages that don't
have
right.
written.
they don't really.
Well, that's the oral part. When they go into oral.
Oh, okay. So either or, not
Oh,
both.
not
Or,
Okay.
or both.
Is
Or
it?
both.
Mighty question? What?
It's,
I'm confused.
The ASL thing might be a good mini question.
Yeah, the ASL thing is good.
So can you briefly explain that one more time?
So, basically, so he says that people acquire language one way, through oral or written messages that they understand. So basically, the main point of it is that they understand it. So it can go slightly out of, like, let's say you're doing proximal development and have their input that they understand plus 1 is like the example. So a little above what they understand.
Mhm.
If there's if it's input plus 0, so nothing's added to it, you just completely already understand it, you're not going to have any language acquisition from that. Just like if you're learning addition and you already know 5 plus 5, getting 5 plus 5 isn't teaching you anything. And then, but if that input is like too great, so it's input plus 10, then it would just be like, it's like if you just start talking to someone in a language they don't understand and they're like, I'm not going to learn what you're saying because I have no idea what you're saying. And it's just noise. And that's basically that. It just means that the way that we acquire language is through comprehensible input.
Cool.
And comprehensible input is oral or written messages that we understand.
And then my question is kind of just wondering if it's specifically oral or if oral can also mean
Oral and written does it include sign language?
No.
because there's gloss in sign language, but it's only for learning. It's not for acquisition.
What's gloss?
It's the written form of sign language, so they're English concepts chosen to represent.
Pictures?
No, it's like uppercase, all uppercase letters, and it says I go to store you to, question mark, so they're chosen to represent. But if you are deaf and sign language is how you learn, you're never going to use gloss. You'll use English. Gloss is just for people who are learning sign language to learn how to transfer it on paper.
Or interpreters.
Yeah, interpreters as well. If you need to write a song and you need to interpret it into gloss.
But if you think about the sentence structure of sign language, it's nothing like how you speak English. So it would be confusing to they learn how to read obviously, but it would be different than how you sign.
Whereas the way we read is the way all speak.
Cool. Are we on 4?
Yeah.
Okay. So mine was what is the effective filter? I get all these ones. And what concept or what does this concept play in your decision making about establishing the environment, activities, and relationships you establish in the classroom? So I was like, okay, so the idea is that there are several effective variables at play in the learning, like we've already talked about, like motivation, self-confidence, and anxiety. And then those with the positive variables at play are better equipped for success in the learning of a second language, while those with the negative variables can raise the effective filter, and then, this is black, but I meant block, and block comprehensible input from acquisition. So it's important to have a safe atmosphere where our students can learn and they can freely ask questions, collaborate, communicate, so that they don't get that big filter blocking out all the knowledge, that they're just like, yeah, throw it at me. And yeah, we talked about it a couple times though.
Okay, so B and C, I think we worked together on this one. I just listed them all. Do you want me to just read them?
Go ahead.
Okay, for social, first of all, this talked about what factors of social and psychological distance that influence second language acquisition. So social distance, they had social dominance, social dominance, integration patterns, enclosure, cohesion, size, attitude, intended length of residence, cultural congruence, good, check me. And then intended length of residence, yeah. And then for psychological, they had motivation, attitude, and culture shock. And then I just said these factors can affect the ease in which a student can learn. For example, if they're too stressed by not being able to understand the community that they're in, then they will be that will affect their ability to acquire the language. It'll affect it negatively.
This section also made me think about, I'm blanking on the term, so maybe you guys can help me. The word for people that have to come to another country, out of force.
Oh, refugees.
Refugees, thank you. This made me think of refugees because especially the culture shock, attitude, and motivation, also intended length of residence. So if refugees don't think that they'll be here for very long, why would they have the motivation to learn the language of this new country that they're in? And then they probably wouldn't have a positive attitude about this new language or the country that they're in because they're here under force. And then the culture shock of a new language or of a new country that they're in would be really confusing. Anyway, so that's just what that made me think of.
Sweet. No, it sounds good. And then D, right?
Oh yeah. So I was asked to talk. Oh, he and I work together.
Here.
I'm sorry. I'm so tired.
You did?
Yeah. What is output or interactionist approach? So I said that the or
Okay,
I
you
didn't
do
say.
you do Sway and I'll do Van Leer.
Oh, I said they were the same thing. I didn't find a difference between them.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
There wasn't really
Yeah, okay, we can both just, okay. It just suggests that learners need opportunities to practice output instead of just hearing input because, like, Krashen's like, oh, it's all input, comprehensible input, but, like, the output approach suggests that people need opportunities to practice creating language and, like, saying things without their monitor on.
because they're also just going to be hearing it all the time and like, yeah, that's helpful, but then you're not practicing it.
Yeah. And I would totally second that as
Yeah.
a Spanish minor.
So I don't understand why Krashen says that it's only input.
Yeah,
Like,
because
where
there's
does that come
definitely-
from?
And then it also asked if we thought we were more of nativists or interactionists, and I had to look up those words because they were not
They
in
were
my
not
reading
in the book,
section.
yeah.
So I looked them up, and a nativist, hang on, I'll pull the definitions so I can summarize them in accurate words. Nativist perspective. I'm sorry, I'm so tired, you guys.
Let's go on. It's okay.
Perspective argues that humans are like biologically programmed, so it's like nature versus nurture, totally nature. And then interactionist theory argues that language development is both biological and social. So children are born predispositioned with like a powerful brain that like predisposes them to new understandings, but only if they're motivated to share them with others and motivated to communicate with people will they ever use them. And so I said I'm definitely more interactionist,
Yeah.
but like also nativist too, because I think that people are born with universal grammar and they've written stuff. But yeah.
Universal grammar, like what about the people and
Hey, you know what? There are weird exceptions to every rule.
yeah. So basically, I talked about that same thing, and then I just talked about the two people. So Swain talked about how language learners need output, and that second language acquisition depends on that because it needs also attention to syntax, not just like hearing everything. And then Van Leer, I just wrote this quote that's like the ability to use language creatively is what measures proficiency. So basically that we need to be able to like speak it too because we need to be able to form words creatively to be able to say that we can actually speak the language. You can't just memorize the cat.
Gato.
That's the only word I
Like I was gonna say like the cat ate food.
But then you can never say the dog ate food.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You need to be creative in your speaking.
You have to understand how the nouns fit into the sentence.
That's why I like American Sign Language because it makes so much
Yeah.
sense. It's like, duh, that's the sign for that word.
Or it's
Like cat.
Well, there's iconic, and then there's symbolic. Like, like who's gonna know that this is like stars?
That's true, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
one?
Stars, and then socks.
I get stars, like
This is caterpillar.
No, don't talk about caterpillars. I don't like caterpillars.
Are we on number 5?
6?
I don't know what that is.
5.
Snail.
5.
Oh no.
It's a bad
Dang
word.
it, only 5.
Oh, I get it.
What is
Okay,
that?
What is
so we're on number 5. I'm A. Mine was language as structure, and basically this whole chunk was about like traditional like methods of learning grammar, and they were all very sad to me. So it was like language as structure is divided into different approaches with the main idea of using traditional grammar with explicit rules to be followed. So there's structure, the input, explicit instruction, production practice, and providing negative feedback. And they're all, they're the most widely used models of teaching English still today, but they're most often used in countries where English is not the native language. And I think we've already talked about this before, where I think it's, I can't remember what country, but the students, they learn a strong understanding about English, and then they'll come here and they can't speak a lick of it, because they've only learned about it and they don't know how to communicate. And so
That's
this whole
before you
chunk,
need output and input.
yeah, and it was and just acquisition instead of just learning, and it is just really sad because they're all just about how it has to be rules and rules and rules and rules. And then the providing negative feedback. When a student makes an error, the teacher can correct it, usually by providing the correct form. And the student says, I've been here since 2 days, the teacher might respond. But instead of just always being positive, you can be like, no, And so I was like, but yeah, a lot of repeating and textbook stuff. Yeah.
Is that
I
my
have a question about sign language. So there's American Sign Language. So in other places where they have different sign languages, are they all different signs
Yeah.
or
Just like
completely?
Yeah, and it talks about that in the last article as well. How there's no universal, and it came
remember
from
seeing
FSL. So French Sign Language is where it originated, kind of how English.
That's just so interesting. Like, why wouldn't they use the same signs?
Well, why don't we all have
Why
the
don't
same
we all have the
language?
same words?
Yeah, but I feel like it's slightly different.
I don't think so.
Just like any other.
Yeah.
If it was developed like less than 100 years ago completely, then yeah, it should all be the same because we should have like coordinated
How long
it.
ago
but
was it?
Forever.
Montclair and Gallaudet, I think it was 18.
It was before there was like a lot of global communication, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we have 10 minutes.
Okay, so
It's
is
12
it my
actually.
turn? So it asked me to define what language as a mental faculty is. And
Wow, fancy words.
basically, language as a mental faculty is the idea that language is a built-in mental ability, so that you're just born able to communicate and like build language. Yeah, humans have the innate ability to construct rules and allow them to comprehend and produce utterances in any language. Cool, it's basically it.
Another good question about sign language. So, you know how people speak English in other places other than in America, obviously. So, do other places in the world use American Sign Language or
Probably
not?
in like, I know Australian Sign Language has some similarities, but like their finger spelling is two-handed instead of one. And I know there is Black Sign Language as well. So just like we have Black English.
Yeah, and like a lot of some Americans know French Sign Language because that was like the first sign
You
language.
two should be doing a spotlight presentation on deaf culture. But
Yeah,
I didn't
I
wanna-
didn't even see that.
I saw that one, but I didn't want to like not learn
Right.
more.
That's fair.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just
Yes,
do
That was
mine?
really
Okay.
cute.
Let's hurry up. Okay. Language. So mine was language as a functional resource. And what I said was so language is a series of choices based off the context of like the situation of what you're talking about. And it's made up of three components, like the context. And so it's the field, so what you're talking about, the tenor, which is who you're talking about, and the mode, which is the mean of communication, like writing or speaking or signing. And these ideas eventually led to a way of teaching second language acquisition, which is called the curriculum cycle. And they explained it a little bit in the book. And so that's what that was. It was pretty cool. Just explained like the structure.
Okay, so mine was, it says, well, the question was the statement of what I was supposed to do, okay, whatever, was that the authors conclude the chapter by questioning the role of teaching grammar in traditional ways, and then I was supposed to summarize the positions they presented in the conclusion related to grammar. And so I said that, oh, my computer just turned off, hang on, I don't remember what I said. Okay, I said that, it closed again. Crashin believes something, it's here. It's not here.
He
you wanna
believes
go-
lots of things.
Do you want to go to E really quick?
Yeah, let's do
Yeah,
it.
you
no
E.
There's no E?
There's no E.
There was no
Oh, that's
E.
right. Hang on, wait, I'm gonna find it, you guys.
Wait.
Crashin,
Didn't
I
have
found
to do
it.
anything?
Crashin
I was
believes
gonna
that
do this
the
as well,
learning of the rules of grammar has very little impact on acquisition, but learned rules can be used to monitor output. So Crashin basically believes that we can acquire language most effectively when we receive comprehensible input under conditions with a low effective filter. Whoa, we've said that a lot, haven't
Wait,
we?
comprehensible input?
Yeah.
No
Isn't that
way.
crazy?
What is that?
Funny
However,
question.
I don't really know who Schumann is, but Schumann believes that too much social and psychological distance between the learner and the target language leads to limited acquisition. So if there's no knowledge of the language that they're learning, so no background in language theory or whatever, then they can't learn anything, which is also confirming what Crashin believes, but just barely different. And still other people argue that language is acquired the most effectively through opportunities to practice output. I just summarized the
Dun, dun,
chapter.
dun. Okay, do you want to lead us on the next one, on the all?
Petito.
I'll
She
read it.
doesn't want to lead us on the all.
I'll read it to you guys. Number 1.
You don't have to read it to us.
Okay, so is sign language a real language?
Yes.
So it said, yeah, because it's evolved naturally, it's been passed on through generations, there's no single universal sign that sign language that all deaf individuals use. There's no random, this is to say that there's no random gesturing all deaf people understand, so it's not just like, you know? Instead made up of both symbolic and iconic signs to represent chosen words and concepts and so on.
I just think that it's strange that someone would think it's not a real language.
Well, because it's not oral, and so many people. It's like when people say it's not a sport unless it has a ball, and therefore pool is a sport, therefore bowling is a sport.
But
Who
dance is
said
not.
that?
But dance is not a
Which is
sport.
dumb because dance is a sport.
Thank you.
Sometimes I don't think
Okay, I was a
my whole
dancer for
life.
like 10 years.
I used to be a golfer. I mean, it's
You
a
just
sport,
play golf.
but not for me. Not when I do it, it's not.
For you, it's like, ooh.
But it's it's kind of like that. It's like a debate that'll never really end.
I just feel like that's not a debate either, whether or not. Okay.
Yeah.
That's silly.
Have you ever heard people say that it's not a language if it doesn't have a written
Yeah, that's
part
dumb
of it
also.
too? Like that's kind of similar.
Mm.
But I think if you're conveying any sort of concept
That
across
everyone
to other
understands.
people, then
Yeah, and the fact that you're basing like what a language is off of your own language is pretty privileged.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you're ignorant.
Do we have 3 muddy questions already?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And then should we
For
integrate
two.
the last question? Yeah, into
Yeah.
this combo.
There's 3 main stages. The syllabic babbling stage, the first word stage, and the first 2-word stage.
Oh my gosh! Speaking of which, do you guys want to see a really cute video?
Yeah. So is babbling. So is babbling with babies like they just move their
They
hands?
go ba 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 do do
Ba,
ba
ba,
do
ba.
da.
No,
Very
for
random.
sign language.
Oh yeah.
They'll just like move their hands in non-meaningful ways.
Probably, yeah. And then they'll start picking up signs, and then you can actually, teach sign language to
Yeah.
real.
So it is.
Will they not make
Quiet.
do they still?
They'll get English when they go into schooling, but they'll probably be a little quieter and a little slower to pick it up, just because of parents. There's actually a lot of cool. They're called CODAs, Children of Deaf Adults, and so they have a lot of them write books because they have this horrible guilt of being hearing throughout their lives,
And
being interpreters for their parents.
I don't know if you guys know this, but it's not like a gene. It's like random. So most hearing or
With
most
deaf parents.
people with deaf parents won't be deaf.
Mhm.
Is that common knowledge?
Because a lot of it
It's
was
not
rubella.
knowledge. I just read a book on it.
I just knew
Okay.
because there's a little girl watching
Watch this now.
Are we watching this on this video?
Say Dada.
Who is this?
This is my boyfriend's niece.
That's right.
She said Dada.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, are we
You
gonna-
missed her face, but her face was really excited.
But yeah.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Dunzo?
Bam!
That's
Complete.